Those who talk, there was a famous spokesman for this in Virginia until recently, about the rapture, say that those of us who have chosen rightly will be gathered to the arms of Jesus, leaving all of the rest of you behind. If we're in a car, it's your lookout. That car won't have a driver anymore. If we're a pilot, that's your lookout. That plane will crash. We will be with Jesus, and the rest of you can go straight to hell. The eschatological element that is inseparable from Christianity. If you don't believe that there is to be an apocalypse, there is going to be an end, a separation of the sheep and the goats, a condemnation, a final one, then you're not really a believer. And the contempt for the things of this world shows through all of them. It's well put in an old rhyme from an English exclusive brethren sect. It says that we are the pure and chosen few, and all the rest are damned. There's room enough in hell for you. We don't want heaven crammed. You can tell it when you see the extreme Muslims talk. They cannot wait. They cannot wait for death and destruction to overtake and overwhelm the world. They can't wait for what I would call, without ambiguity, a final solution. When you look at the Israeli settlers, paid for often by American tax dollars, deciding that if they can steal enough land from other people and get all the Jews into the promised land and all the non-Jews out of it, then finally the Jewish people will be worthy of the return of the Messiah. And there are Christians in this country who consider it their job to help this happen so that Armageddon can occur, so that the painful business of living as humans and studying civilization and trying to acquire learning and knowledge and health and medicine and to push back can all be scrapped, and the cult of death can take over. That, to me, is a hideous thing in eschatological terms, in end times terms, on its own. A hateful idea, a hateful practice, and a hateful theory, but very much to be opposed in our daily lives, where there are people who sincerely mean it, who want to ruin the good relations that could exist between different peoples, nations, races, countries, tribes, ethnicities, who openly say they love death more than we love life, and who are betting that with God on their side, they're right about that. So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means we can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence of sadomasochism. The essence of abjection. The essence of the master-slave relationship. And that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil. And though I do some nights stay home, I enjoy more the nights when I go out and fight against this ultimate wickedness and ultimate stupidity. Thank you.
Dr. Turek, your close.
First of all, I want to thank everyone. I know it's been a long night, and I enjoy listening to Christopher, even if I don't agree with him. And I want to thank Christopher for being here and putting so much effort into this debate. Let me just clean up a few things that I wasn't able to respond to before. And that is this issue of design, where Christopher seems to say because things are going to oblivion, it wasn't designed. Well, first of all, design in a world constrained by physical constraints can only be optimal if you know the purpose of the designer. Stephen Jay Gould had a book years ago called Panda's Thumb, where he complained that the panda's thumb was not as good as our thumb. It only seemed to enable the panda to strip bamboo. Well, maybe that's all the panda was supposed to do, is strip bamboo. You can't say it's suboptimal design unless you know what the purpose of the designer was. My car is not designed perfectly, but it's still designed. So just because you find faults in design doesn't mean there is no design, and you wouldn't be able to find a fault unless you knew what the purpose of the designer was. Let me now summarize Christopher's book. And as I read Christopher's book, it seems to me he's making two statements. The first statement is, there is no God, and I hate him. After all, Christopher defines himself as an anti-theist, not an atheist, but an anti-theist. And that's why he couldn't even respond to the question, what might change your mind? Nothing is going to change Christopher's mind. His mind is made up. The second, he's narrow-minded, yes. The second major point he makes is, since religious people do evil things, God doesn't exist. That is a non sequitur in logic. We all do evil things. That doesn't mean our parents don't exist. Just because people do evil things doesn't mean that all religion is false. And Christopher bunches all religions together and makes no distinctions that need to be made. I am with you, Christopher, on your opposition of radical Islam. I am with you. I am with you politically on more things than you will know. Because I think many religions are false. And there are many false beliefs. In fact, many religious people, here's the points Christopher makes, and he's right about many of these things. Many religious people have behaved terribly. Many religious beliefs are false and can't be justified. You don't need to believe in God to know right from wrong. You don't need the Bible or any other religious book to know basic right and wrong. Morality predates Scripture. I agree with all that, and that, in fact, is the Christian view as well. And unless someone outside of the universe intervenes or the laws of nature change, this incredibly fine-tuned universe will go to oblivion. I agree with all that. But none of these things are arguments against the existence of God. God could still exist even if all of Christopher's assertions and complaints are true. Let me also point out that religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion, regrettably, I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. And that's why Christ had to come, because none of us live up to it. But we know what the standards are because there's a standard beyond ourselves. Christopher has identified how religious people poison religion, how they act immorally. You know, that's what Jesus and the prophets did and why Jesus came. Christopher is so charming and he is so persuasive. He is like an Old Testament prophet. He is. And he is calling the church to morality. He can't define what that is, but he's calling them to it. He's not calling them to the Christian morality necessarily. He's calling them to his own morality. But what he points out are some of the very things Jesus pointed out. Many people in the church are following tradition rather than the words of Christ. Many people in the church are doing evil things. Jesus condemned the people who were the most religious because they were the furthest away from God. And Christopher's to be commended for that, because many of them are. But unlike Jesus, who appealed to God's standard of morality, Christopher's atheism affords him no objective moral standard by which to judge anything wrong, including all the sins of religious people: circumcision, sexual restrictions, suicide bombing, etc. He has to borrow objective morality from the theistic worldview in order to argue against it. He has to assume God in order to deny him. He has to sit in God's lap in order to slap his face. He also has to borrow aspects of the theistic worldview in order to even get his worldview off the ground. He has to borrow the universe, which is a pretty big issue. He has to borrow fine-tuning, life, reason, math, human freedom, and consciousness. Notice he never addressed any of those things. Where do those come from in an atheistic worldview? Christopher, in the last chapter of his book, talks about we need to get away from all this religious stuff and we need to go to Enlightenment values. What are Enlightenment values? Well, is what Christopher says on the last page of his book. Quote, "Very importantly, the divorce between the